Hello everyone. Before the British colonies and before legends of the frontier and cowboys, there was one Spanish conquistador who carried the dream of a Roman Christian civilization into the heart of North America. He believed he could bend an entire continent to the Spanish crown and to God. But beneath that legend lies a far darker truth. A legacy of violence and monstrous ambition that haunted America long after his death. This would-be conquistador is known as Hernando de Soto.
Hernando de Soto was born in Extremadura around 1497, about 5 years after Columbus's first voyage into the unknown. De Soto was born into a family of the lesser nobility. He endeavored to rise through the ranks of his society by heading to another part of the world, to America, to see what opportunities lied there.
De Soto sailed for America in 1514.
There, De Soto joined the campaigns of Pedro Arias Dávila. Pedro Arias Dávila helped secure Spanish victory at the end of the Reconquista. And De Soto would be part of his campaigns of conquest. De Soto proved himself to be a valuable captain in the conquest of Nicaragua. He was known for swift and brutal efficiency. The Spanish friar, Bartolomé de las Casas, noted that Soto, quote, was much given to that sport of killing Indians, unquote. In fact, De Soto's fellow conquistadors were impressed by his ability to get things done quickly. In return, De Soto was appointed as captain of the guards, where he used his new position to do Pedrarias' bidding. Indeed, it looked like De Soto's gambles were paying off. His dreams were coming true. He conquered and held some of the best land in Nicaragua. He enslaved Native Americans there and trafficked them for a handsome profit. He acquired a reputation for himself and had a personal following. Yet De Soto may have gotten bored and wanted more. Maybe he sought fame and wealth. Maybe he sought adventure. Or maybe he was driven by his lust for blood. Whatever the case, he found a new adventure. De Soto joined the main expedition, an expedition led by none other than the conquistador Francisco Pizarro. And the arrival of De Soto's forces gave Pizarro the confidence that they were finally strong enough to begin the conquest of the Inca imperial state. De Soto's major contribution were his numerous horses. Therefore, De Soto's forces were to be the vanguard in the conquest of the Inca. De Soto was the tip of the spear. Indeed, so bold and fearless was De Soto that he and about 15 other men ventured into the heart of the Inca imperial army to meet the Inca leader, Atahualpa. The chroniclers state that De Soto demonstrated no fear in the face of overwhelming numbers. And likewise, neither did Atahualpa, especially when De Soto attempted to intimidate him with his horse riding skills. And eventually, Pizarro captured Atahualpa at the Battle of Cajamarca. And in the aftermath of the capture, De Soto was amongst the conquistadors capitalizing on the Spanish victories. De Soto became a chief torturer, using pain and violence on Incan generals to reveal where the Inca gold and treasures were. Indeed, De Soto most likely learned of these brutal interrogation techniques from his old mentor, Pedrarias. Now, Pedrarias had a nickname, Furor Domini, which is Latin for the wrath of God. In the aftermath of the Inca conquest, De Soto melted down his portion of Inca treasure and returned back to Spain in 1536. For his outstanding bravery and fortitude in extending the borders of the Spanish Empire, Charles V made him a knight in the Military Order of Santiago. Moreover, Charles V made him governor of Cuba and also gave him a mandate to conquer Florida. Florida being the land that had consumed so many conquistadors before him. Now, De Soto knew of the previous failed expeditions to Florida. After accepting his governorship and mandate to conquer Florida, Cabeza de Vaca appeared in the Spanish court. Cabeza de Vaca being one of the few survivors of the previous disastrous Narvaez expedition to Florida in 1527. Although Cabeza de Vaca testified to the lack of cities and wealth in Florida, rumors quickly spread that he was lying. The rumors spoke of Florida being one of the richest lands in the world, despite de Vaca's testimonies. After all, we know as historians, especially if you've watched previous episodes of mine, that a small number of Spanish conquistadors depended on hundreds and thousands of Native American allies to facilitate their goals, that the Spanish needed to make coalitions with the natives in order to succeed. We also know in hindsight that the Spanish who wrote the histories wrote them in such a way as to exclude the contributions of the natives. So these things shed light on why these rumors were believable. After all, a small band of Spanish conquistadors supposedly triumphed over all odds and overwhelming numbers to conquer some of the most powerful American peoples, the Mexica and the Inca. So why did the conquistadors fail to conquer Florida? The conquistadors wondered. Maybe the kingdoms of Florida are significantly more powerful and therefore significantly richer than the Mexica and the Inca. And this would be something worth investigating. Now, while he was in Spain, De Soto married a noble wife, the daughter of his old mentor, Arias. And I want to take a moment here to recap where he's at in his life. By his early 40s, De Soto had it all. He had fame, honor, and conquest under his belt. He had a wife. He was rich, he was famous, but still it was not enough. He shared with Cortés and Cabrillo that overbearing ambition for more and more. De Soto, like them, embodied the ethos of Emperor Charles V, the ethos of plus ultra.
Hernando de Soto's expedition to North America involved a little over 600 troops and over 200 horsemen. Numerous Native Americans, along with both free and enslaved Africans, also accompanied the expedition, serving primarily as porters, guides, and interpreters. Though if and when shit hit the fan, they no doubt were also combatants. Historians think he landed somewhere near modern-day Tampa Bay. When he landed on American shores, De Soto no doubt felt confident. He had been conquering and plundering civilizations for decades at this point. He also used his own vast personal wealth to finance the conquest of Florida, no expenses spared, purchasing the best equipment and hiring the most able men. How could he possibly fail?
De Soto's most dire miscalculation was believing he could employ the same tactics that proved successful against the Maya, Nahua, and Inca peoples. In all of these cases, the conquistadors were lucky to encounter societies divided by their own infighting and therefore factions of natives willing to work with the Spanish. Internal divisions amongst the Mexica, Maya, and Inca peoples was a rot that eroded their civilizations and made them vulnerable prey to outside powers. In North America, De Soto would repeatedly encounter unified peoples. Native Americans who knew that the only way they could stand up to such tyranny was to be united. That divided they could only fail. In fact, when De Soto attempted to craft the same type of Spanish native coalitions that guaranteed success against the Aztecs, Maya, and Inca, the native Floridians refused. The Native Americans rejected attempts at cooperation. After all, they were already familiar with the Spanish. With Ponce de Leon, with Narvaez, and with other slave-raiding expeditions along the Florida coast, they knew they couldn't trust the Spanish. Take the Timucua peoples, for example, a collective of distinct ethnicities and cultures derived from a common culture, the Timucua. Think of it kind of like the ancient Greeks, where Spartans and Athenians had their own very distinct cultures, but were still seen as Greeks. The Timucua perceived the Spanish to be like professional drifters, vagabonds, or homeless people who wandered around stealing and killing wherever they went. To the Timucua, the Spanish were modern-day gangsters, people who abducted and trafficked their victims and used murder to get their way. In other cases, where the native Floridians actually cooperated, they served as guides, only to lead Spanish forces into locations where they could be ambushed. And as punishment for a would-be ambush, he had Spanish war dogs eviscerate the guide. This kind of deceit and leading the Spanish into ambushes enraged De Soto. And De Soto came to see the natives as deceitful people you could not trust. As a result, he fell back on the practices of his old mentor, the apparent manifestation of God's wrath. In another instance, Timucua guides from Paracoxi told of vast sums of gold in the province of Cale. Being suspicious, the conquistadors chained the guides together. When they realized they were being led into an ambush, the Spanish used dogs to kill 4 of them, causing the 5th guide to be more honest with his directions. Much of De Soto's anger was likely due to the fact he was consistently being used by Native Americans for Native American interests. Native Americans often portrayed their enemies as wealthy and their allies as poor. Keep in mind that the civilizations of North America had borders. The peoples here had boundaries and territories. The Europeans did not invent these things or bring them to the natives. When the natives waged war against each other, it was not the type of full-scale conquest that Europeans were used to, but rather more like raids on enemy positions before you retreated back to your territory. And for the most part, De Soto was entirely dependent on the Native Americans for orientation within the geography and any news about any and every peoples. The Spanish did not know any of these things. They had no knowledge of the North American interior. They were dependent on the natives. And as a result, they got roped into Native American disputes. Moving northward, the De Soto expedition wintered in the territory of the Apalachee people. These were the people who ended the Narvaez expedition, causing the Spanish to flee. As De Soto approached the Apalachee capital of Inca, the inhabitants fled and De Soto found an empty city. Nonetheless, De Soto pursued them, burned the villages down, and when he finally caught them, he sliced off their hands and noses to send a message. Yet, such terror tactics did not work. The Apalachee used guerrilla warfare until De Soto moved on with his journey. The conquistadors ventured into the modern-day South Carolina, encountering peoples belonging to the Mississippian culture. They reached the town of Himahi, and short on supplies and wanting to also make a profit, they demanded to know where the Lord's village was. But De Soto had been well trained in getting people to speak. The conquistadors captured several natives. De Soto ordered them to be burned alive one by one until one of them gave him the information which he sought. Thereafter, the conquistadors made the journey to the town of Cofitachequi, one of the South's wealthiest urban centers. Cofitachequi was impressive because of its monumental architecture, that is, large earthen mounds. There they met a chief, and historians have traditionally labeled the chief as the Lady of Cofitachequi. But she was more than simply a lady. She was a chief, a noble matriarch, ruling over a vast multi-ethnic and multilingual realm, consisting of thousands of subjects strewn across the modern-day Carolinas. And the Spanish chroniclers described her as beautiful, graceful, and self-assured. One chronicler described the Cofitachequis as the most beautiful people in the Southeast, saying, quote, "The people are very clean and very polite and naturally well-developed," unquote. And while the Spanish forces recuperated, the matriarch fled. She had hoped her disappearance would mean depriving De Soto's expedition of the means to continue. But the Spanish would not give up so easily. They tracked her down to her dwelling in Talimeco. There, her temple stood proudly above an earthen mound. Captain Gonzalo Silvestre, a veteran soldier, told an interviewer that the temple was, quote, "among the grandest and most wonderful of all things that he had seen in the New World," unquote. Unlike the stone temples of the Mexica, the Maya, and the Inca, the Mississippians constructed their monuments out of earth and wood, ensuring that, unfortunately, their structures would disappear over time. Yet, as we can deduce from the chronicles that the Spaniards themselves wrote, they were very impressed. Beautiful pearls and shells decorated the interior of the temple. You also had carved warrior statues lining the walls. It was a sort of treasure house/museum filled with all sorts of valuable and beautiful things such a civilization could gather. De Soto ordered his men to find and capture the Lady of Cofitachequi, which they did. They took her hostage. The matriarch's subjects would not dare attack the Spanish, for they could expect the murder of their semi-divine matriarch in retaliation. The matriarch and her entourage of enslaved women traveled with De Soto for a little bit. That is, until they reached the boundaries of her territory. The Spanish were the devils she did not know. The other Native Americans were the devils she did know. One possibility is that the Spanish could offer her up as a prize to her enemies in return for food and native troops, a fate she would wish to avoid. She, her entourage, and a number of enslaved natives and enslaved Africans fled the De Soto expedition. Yet, De Soto pressed on. They next reached the town of Arahachi and met the chief Tuscaloosa. Now, the extent of Tuscaloosa's domain is uncertain, but like the matriarch, it is speculated that he also ruled a vast multi-ethnic collection of various polities. And when they met, De Soto employed a similar strategy as he did with the Inca. He attempted to intimidate the chief with his horse, and like Atahualpa, Tuscaloosa exhibited no signs of fear. Things took a turn for the worse when De Soto demanded that Tuscaloosa provide him with male slaves for transportation and female slaves for pleasure. Shocked by such a request, Tuscaloosa replied that he did not serve anyone, rather, everyone served him. Angered, De Soto took him hostage. Tuscaloosa promised that he would provide the Spanish with the women they sought. When they reached Mabila, De Soto sought another conquistador to check out the town. Something just didn't seem right. This was not a town. This was a military encampment. Mabila ambassadors came out and invited De Soto to enter. Apparently not wanting to be upstaged by the fearlessness of Atahualpa and Tuscaloosa, he and a group of conquistadors entered. Thousands of Mabila troops sprang from their concealed positions and ambushed De Soto's guard. De Soto himself was wounded, falling to the ground several times while being mobbed. He set fire to the town, and the battle raged on for another 7 to 9 hours. And by the end of it, the town, their plunder, and their treasure were all burnt, turned into ash, much like his dreams of a North American Spanish imperium. The loss of so much at the battle, combined with the failure to find enough wealth to recuperate his financing of the expedition, contributed to this psychological turning point. It was a bitter victory. One historian wrote of the battle's aftermath, saying, quote, "He was embittered. He may have seen death as the only acceptable outcome left for him, and he may have been willing to take everyone else down with him. He began to waste the lives of both the Indians and his own men," unquote. Indeed, it may have been that De Soto thought he lost it all, his finances, his reputation. Maybe De Soto thought the only way to preserve or regain his honor was to, from his perspective, go out in a blaze of glory. But while for him it may have been the heroic culmination of a life of adventure, to others it was a frenzy of bloodlust and violence. For example, when De Soto captured a Kaya chief in the Arkansas Valley, the chief fed him stories of the resources and wealth of the Tula people. The chief did not tell them that the Tulas were the most feared people in Arkansas. The Spanish came to learn the hard way that the Tula reputation for ferocity and inhumanity were unmatched. In fact, with other Native American peoples, when faced with their crying children, they hushed them by threatening to bring the Tula to make them shut the fuck up. For the Spanish, the Tula would have been visually striking. Yeah, their faces were covered in tattoos, but the Tulas were some of the few peoples in the area who practiced cranial shaping, a process of elongating the skull that begins at childhood. And when they finally entered the territory, the Tula rained down hard on De Soto's men. The bravery and ferocity of the Tula surprised the Spanish, caught them off guard. In contrast to all the other natives encountered so far, the Tula hunted buffalo. Since they hunted buffalo, the Tula knew how to use their spears and lances against mounted targets, and they knew how to engage charging conquistadors on horseback. Moreover, the Tula women fought as equally well as the Tula men. De Soto must have came to the decision that the rewards were not worth the risk. America's Native American Spartans insisted that they did not know of any large or wealthy villages to the west, that the Spanish would do better returning in the direction they came from, and De Soto obliged. De Soto would continue his rampage for almost another year. He cut a swath of terror and violence through the region. The protege of the Wrath of God simply became the Wrath. De Soto eventually catches a fever that proves to be fatal. As he lay dying of fever, he continued to guide the conquest of the North. In one instance, whenever a chief refused to visit De Soto lamented that he was not strong enough to cross the river and give him an attitude adjustment himself. As he approached his final moments, De Soto asked some of his men to gather, thanking them for their loyalty, and De Soto died on May 21st in 1542. Many of his troops paid his body no respects. Less a harbinger of Roman Catholic civilization, of a glorious Spanish Empire of the North, he was consumed by the ideology of the Spanish Imperium. His obsession with the imperial ethos of plus ultra led him to his own ruination. All in all, the expedition of De Soto was one of the most violent military incursions into North America. Indeed, I don't want to revive the myth of the Spanish Black Legend, which was a sort of propaganda offensive. And moreover, there's an argument to be made that you can't judge historical figures of the past by our modern-day standards of morality, our modern-day standards of right and wrong. And indeed, I completely agree with this. We need to understand people at their level, in their context, from their time period. And by 16th century standards of right and wrong, De Soto was a piece of shit. The Spanish friar, who spent considerable time in Spanish America, wrote about De Soto. Las Casas called De Soto a tyrant, or in Spanish, tirano. Las Casas said that De Soto was one of the tyrants who, quote, left the land scandalized and horrified, unquote. De Soto's massacres and killings are corroborated with eyewitness chroniclers who accompanied the De Soto expedition. Yet despite his violence, De Soto played his own role in fostering a more diverse future United States. De Soto transferred Spanish, Catholic, and classical ideas to North American soil. Now, this does not justify or legitimize his violence. I'm saying a coin has two sides. One side of De Soto was his brazen brutality, but the other was his agenda of expanding the Spanish Empire, including its values. Throughout their expedition to the north, the conquistadors constructed wooden crosses as a means to lay claim to the land. That they claimed land for Spain, but also for Roman Catholicism. The Spanish attempted to unify the diversity of peoples in the Western Hemisphere and incorporate them into a Spanish Roman Catholic Empire. Spain took the cosmopolitan heritage of both the Romans and Christianity and transferred it to American soil.
And part of this process was also bringing over their cultural baggage. We've seen numerous times how the Spanish demonized the Mexica and other Native American peoples. Just as how De Soto's expedition evoked the pagan slayer Santiago, they also exorcised American demons. Take the account from Fidalgo de Elvas, one of the chroniclers who accompanied De Soto's expedition. He wrote, quote, "In the town of Potosa, the youth, whom the governor brought with him for guide and interpreter, began to froth at the mouth and threw himself on the ground as if he were possessed of the devil. An exorcism being said over him, the fit went off." Indeed, De Soto's expeditions engaged in the same process of demonizing the American peoples that we saw in previous episodes in regards to the Mexica. But it's important to note that this was a two-way street. The natives depicted the Spanish as monsters. And according to one modern-day historian, the intense brutality, violence, and trauma of De Soto's expedition lived on for generations after the event. Amongst the Caddo peoples, such as the Tula, there emerged an oral tradition of two legends involving a cannibalistic monster made of iron. Now, there are two versions of the story, but I'm going to combine them into one convenient narrative. The story is known as the Old Man with the Iron-Nosed Mask, and it went as follows. There were 10 brothers. One day the oldest went out to hunt and did not return. His family worried about him, and so the next day, one of his brothers went out to search for him, but he also did not return. So the next brother went out in search for his lost brethren. And on it went until there was only one brother left, the youngest. The family, feeling dejected, waited, they hoped, and they despaired. Unable to bear the burden of not knowing any longer, the youngest boy decided to go out and search for his brothers. But his mother forbade him to go. The next day, while out hunting for raccoons in the forest, the youngest met a witch woman who attempted to kill him. But luckily for our young protagonist, he escaped and ran home. That very night, he was visited in a dream. It was a coyote. The coyote told him that his brothers were not dead, that they were being held captive by some bad people who made them work all day. And even more foreboding, the brothers would soon die if they were not freed from their captivity. The coyote promised to help the youngest brother rescue his siblings. When he awoke the next morning, he told his mother of his vision. She instructed him to go and to do as Coyote told him. As he embarked on his adventure, he met Coyote and Flying Squirrel. Flying Squirrel had been captured by the bad people and made to work as a slave. And the more Flying Squirrel spoke, the more distressed the younger brother became. Flying Squirrel told him that the bad people enslaved everyone they could catch, and worse, all those who were no longer useful were killed and eaten. Coyote asked about the boy's brothers. Flying Squirrel said that they were enslaved, like he had once been. Flying Squirrel also said that the only way to free them was to kill the wicked chief in charge, the chief who was known as the Old Man with the iron-nosed mask. Coyote came up with a plan, and together they ventured forth. The only problem was that the wicked chief laid on the other side of the river, and a river was not something Coyote could outsmart. But Flying Squirrel said to fret not. He told them both to hold on to his tail as he flew. Once they reached the other side, Coyote transformed into a cornmill. A woman belonging to the wicked chief saw the pestle, but she could not reach it. She ran and told the chief to retrieve it for her. The chief thought it was a little suspicious, but the woman was basically like, nah, you're overthinking it. She used the pestle to ground some corn, and damn, it was the best fucking pestle she had ever used. She and the other women used it day after day after day until they grounded some sweet corn. The sweet corn disappeared as if someone ate it. Turns out, the chief was right. She ran to the chief and explained, and the chief commanded her to bring him the pestle. Together they placed it on the chopping block. This was the chopping block where the old man with the iron-nosed mask executed his victims before butchering them and consuming their flesh. The Iron Man raised his head high, readying the killing blow. But before his blade could land, the pestle rolled off the log and turned into Coyote. The Iron Man's nose got stuck in the log, and he could not get loose. Coyote grabbed the Iron Chief and held him down. He called out, letting the other slaves know that now was their moment. And the enslaved brothers heard the call and rose up. They grabbed the corn pestles and beat the Iron Man to death. Once the iron-nosed cannibal chief lay dead, they returned home. Now, as one scholar pointed out, the Caddo stories of the masked cannibal show some parallels with the De Soto expedition. The actions of the old man with the iron-nosed mask kind of match up with De Soto's real actions. In the story, the brothers were enslaved. Even poor Flying Squirrel was also enslaved. In real-life historical events, De Soto's men captured and enslaved the natives all throughout their campaign. According to the sources, one scholar estimated that by 1541, De Soto may have had as many as 500 native slaves. They kind of fed this image of cannibalistic Spaniard Iron Man. The expeditionaries cut off noses, they cut off hands, they cut off arms of prisoners before releasing them back to their peoples to terrorize their peoples and basically send a message, do not fuck with the Spanish. Keep in mind that when the Spanish and Europeans discovered America, it caused a paradigm shift in their way of thinking. For the Europeans, their traditional view of the world and cosmos was no longer valid. America was not mentioned in the Bible, and who are these people? They were also not mentioned in the Bible. Is God lying to us, or is the Bible wrong? And the encounters with the Spanish likely would have had the same effect for the Native Americans. Both people's mental scapes were altered by their encounters with each other. For the Native Americans, their landscape was transformed by strange symbols appearing in their environment, alien icons that made the landscape suddenly unfamiliar. They must have been like, what the f is this creepy ass corpse thing on these twigs? And the Caddo sought to make sense of their new reality. Horses became known as sacred dogs. Conquistadors became known as iron cannibals. And Spanish helmets became iron-nosed masks. And the idea of a mask is perfectly symbolic. A Spaniard wearing a mask is two-faced, that is, deceitful, being at once a human but also at the same time a monster. Thus, while De Soto failed to build the Roman Catholic Imperium in America, he nonetheless left a mark. He irrevocably altered the culture and traditions of the people he encountered. And although the natives did not know about Jesus, Europe, or Christianity, they certainly knew the wrath of the Spanish Imperium. Far from exorcising demons from American soil, De Soto and his expeditionaries became their manifestation. But moreover, we see the beginnings of an American spirit begin to emerge. That when jackbooted thugs clad in iron armor showed up in American towns, they did what any self-respecting American should do: resist, rise up against tyrants, and fight for freedom.
Hey guys, I just want to thank you all for watching my video, and I hope to see you guys again real soon. Ciao.